My name's Andrea. I'm in Lillooet, British Columbia, and on traditional Statlium territory, and it is hot. So I live in semi-arid desert. So yesterday, I think it was 45, not Celsius. I think today's gonna be 44. So it's like super dark. Everything, all the blinds are closed. So I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me. So we're going to get started. I also want to hear from you. So type in the comment section below, as I like this to be as interactive as possible. This is a way for us to connect, and I love this platform. So tell me why you are hopping on live, or you could be typing in the comment section after. We do save these and post them so that if you need to pause and run, or you can't catch it live, you can always watch it later. All right, so the Yoga Sutras. This is one of my favorite translations. Okay. And he's so poetic in the way that he writes, which I love. And so it's a translation, obviously, from Sanskrit into English. You know what I love the most about it is that it all comes down to just learning about the self and growing as a human. So that's why I'm so connected to the philosophy. I feel like it's kind of like really straightforward, clear path for me anyhow. Probably the most recognized is like the 8 limbs, right? That Ashtanga path. So his writings are from 2,000 years ago, and Vedic scholars still argue about the timeline. So people who have gone and done their masters and doctorates on this history, there's still different opinions on the timeline. Some people argue that he's a bhakti yogi, a lover of God, writes about devotional styles of yoga, is known for that. Again, very poetic in his writings. So Patanjali, Pata means falling leaves, and Anjali means palms joined in cupped prayer. So really to like receive the teachings is what his name means. So yeah, think about his name and the references behind his name. So the sutras is the textbook of classical yoga, and there's tons of different translations. I'm really excited. The next translation that I'm going to read is a psychologist. Her name is Geraldine Coster, and she's a Western psychologist. So I'm really interested in that connection. So that's going to be the next translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras that I'm going to read. And I'd love for anyone to share what their favorite translations have been over the years, if they have read some different translations of Patanjali's sutras. One of my favorites, easy to follow, easy to read, love how it's so poetic, even in the translation. This is my fave. But I'm really excited to read it from that lens of that psychologist, Geraldine Coster. So let me know if anyone else has other translations of the sutras that they want to share here. So he wrote a couple books that I know about. I'm not a super historian buff, but I do love philosophy. And that's how the historians and the Vedic scholars have sort of mapped out exactly when Patanjali wrote this. And there's still argument about that timeline, like I said. So it's about like 2nd or 3rd AD. But it's impossible to have fixed dates on his writing. And they cross-references by other books that he had written and other sort of philosophical books in that time, like the Bhagavad Gita, etc., the Upanishads. A little bit from the introduction to you. So like I said, it's impossible to fix the dates on his writings. And they base their argument on the idea that, so like I said, the same author, he wrote a Sanskrit grammar text called the Mahabhashya, which has been dated to that earliest period as well. So, and then the Vedas is another scripture and the Upanishads. So that's how they sort of map out the timeline. So I want to quote Mukunda Stills here. The Yoga Sutras are considered a worldview, one of 6 classical Indian philosophical systems. Unlike the other systems, however, Patanjali describes not only a philosophical worldview, but also a method of awakening to and directly experiencing that worldview through self-realization. This perfected self is, in fact, the source of this worldview. And that's why I love it so much, because it's all that self-study and the svadhyaya that's behind this philosophical worldview. So the sutras present not only a merely philosophy, but also a set of landmarks that chart the experiences that lead to the fullest expansion of awareness into its original nature. So basically it's like instructions on how to lift the veils from perception so that it may reflect the true self. So awesome. Okay. The word sutra. So su means thread or string, implying the weaving together of various views from a thought. And tra means to transcend. So sutra thus implies the weaving of thoughts into a sequence that produces transcendental insight into your personal practice. Okay, so it's like threads of this these practices. Some sources claim that there's 194 sutras, and other claim that there's 196. In this translation, there's 196. Okay, let's learn about the chapters, and then I want to share a couple of my favorite sutras with you. So the first chapter, so there's 4 chapters in this Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The first chapter is Samadhi Pada. Okay, so being absorbed in spirit. There's 51 sutras in this chapter, and it's definitely more advanced practices. Basically, in these 51 sutras, it teaches, it explains how to kind of separate yourself, your identity from your thoughts. And I love this so much because I connect these ancient philosophical teachings with Western psychology. And something that I practice a lot is like thought stopping when it comes to like my catastrophic thinking or like my anxiety. So it's pretty cool. So if you're interested in this practice and want to see it from like a lens of Western psychology, I definitely would encourage you to seek out Pete Walker's book, Complex Post-Traumatic Stress from Surviving to Thriving. And he talks a lot about this and the practice of thought stopping. So I just wanted to touch on that connection between this old ancient scripture, poetry almost, on realizing our self. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you if you're interested in that, seek out Pete Walker. Really, really cool. So in this chapter, it's all about the development of concentration in order to realize samadhi. Okay, so that communion with one's spiritual essence. So a lot in this chapter about like Ishvara Pranayahana, right? That surrender, that idea of surrender. And this is a bhakti yoga offering. So very devotional. Okay. I want to share with you from chapter 1. Chapter 1, sutra number 2. And if you want to write this down, that's cool. Or if you just want to sit up nice and tall and absorb these teachings and just receive these teachings, that's an option too. Remember, it's going to be recorded. So enjoy this poetry, these teachings, however you want to see this philosophy. Yoga is experienced in that mind which has ceased to identify itself with the vacillating waves of perception. When this happens, the seer is revealed, resting in its own essential nature, and one realizes the true self. So just notice how those two sutras resonate. How does it make you feel? Yoga, this is verse 2 and 3. So yoga is experienced in that mind which has ceased to identify itself with the vacillating waves of perception. When this happens, the seer is revealed, resting in its own essential nature, and one realizes the true self. So notice how the essence of those words, I know it's not his words, it's a translation, but Mukunda stills, I feel like, brings that poetic tone that Patanjali had in his writing into this translation. Love it. So this is in chapter 1, verse 12. The vacillating waves of perception are stilled through the consistent, earnest practice and non-attachment. Right? So that commitment to the practice. The vacillating waves of perception, right? That's like the suffering, right? Where it's never content, never good enough. I'll be happy when A, B, or C happens. It's all an illusion. Those are the vacillating waves of perception, and that's essentially the suffering. And that's still through consistent, earnest practice and non-attachment. Chapter 1, verse 13. Start again. Of these two practices is the continuous struggle to become firmly established in the stable state of the true self. And I feel like that is such a thread throughout the entire sutras, is this idea of stability. And I'll touch more on that in chapter 2. Okay, so chapter 2 is, let me give a little description of chapter 2. So chapter 2 is called Sadhana Pada. So sadhana is just practice in Sanskrit. So on practice for being immersed in spirit. So in chapter 2, we learn about the practical means to attain Ishvara Pranayahana. So it's kind of funny how it was written like chapter 1 was more advanced, realizing that Ishvara Pranayahana, that immersion with spirit, or the universe, or that connection, or that oneness of everything. So in chapter 2, you learn about the practical means to attain that Ishvara Pranayahana, that surrender. There's 55 sutras in this chapter. This chapter is written to help one overcome obstacles in life by removing impurities. So it has, it's like Kriya Yoga, okay? So purification. Chapter 2 contains the 8-fold path. So Ashtanga yoga. Okay, so maybe just review that eightfold path or the 8 limbs. I'm not going to do it here just because we don't have enough time, but that's found in chapter 2. So practical advice on overcoming suffering and social and ethical guidelines, right? That are in the yamas, the niyamas. Okay. So I'm going to share with you, so that's kind of what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to share chapter 2, verse 28. By sustained practice of all the component parts of yoga, the impurities dwindle away and wisdom's radiant light shines forth with discriminative knowledge. Chapter 2, verse 29. Yoga's 8 component parts are self-control for social harmony, precepts for personal discipline, a yoga pose, regulation of prana, withdrawal of senses from their objects, contemplation of our true nature, meditation on the true self, and being absorbed in spirit. So that's the 8 limb path there. Just in those 2 verses. And then you find the yamas and the niyamas in verse 2, chapter 2, verse 30. So these are the yamas. Self-control consists of 5 principles: nonviolence, truthfulness, freedom from stealing, behavior that respects the divine as omnipresent, and freedom from greed. And then the niyamas is chapter 2, verse 32. The precepts also consist of 5 principles: purity, contentment, self-discipline, and purification, self-study, devotion to yoga. And so these threads of wisdom and knowledge and teachings, these sutras, are meant for us to contemplate and sit with. So you can start from the beginning or just open a page, pick a verse, and practice that for the day or the week. Oh, there's so many that I want to share. I want you to find your most comfortable yoga position. So it might be an active posture. It might be a supine posture where you're resting down on a restorative bolster, perhaps. I want you to find the most awesome posture for you right now. I'll give you a moment. And then I'm going to read chapter 2, verse 46. One of my faves, and often one sutra that I share with my students. So everyone in their posture, take a deep breath in and a big exhale out. Yoga pose is a steady and comfortable position. That's it. Chapter 2, verse 46. Yoga pose is a steady and comfortable position. Chapter 2, verse 47. Yoga pose is mastered by relaxation of effort, lessening the tendency for restless breathing, and promoting an identification of oneself as living within the infinite breath of life. So awesome. Okay. Chapter 3 is Vibhitu Pada, so on supernatural abilities and gifts. Okay, so there's 56 sutras in this chapter. So after mastering the body and the mind, concentration, purification, it's time to unravel in this chapter mysterious supernatural abilities. Okay. What do I have to share from chapter 3? Yeah, it starts with like practical guidelines at the beginning of chapter 3, and I'll just share chapter 3, verse 2. Meditation depends upon this foundation for directing thoughts into a continuous flow of awareness. I should have started with chapter 3, verse 1. So let me start again. Chapter 3, verse 1. Contemplation is confining of thought to one point. Chapter 3, verse 2. Meditation depends upon this foundation for directing thoughts into a continuous flow of awareness. A little more advanced. So we start with the body and the mind. We start there. Chapter 4 is Kaivalya Pada on absolute freedom. So transcending space and time. Just one moment. All right, thanks so much for being so patient with me. Working mom, no childcare in the summer is so tough. Okay, so I want to share one more quote from Mukunda Stiles in his introduction on, do you want to come say hi? Yeah. Come on up. Say hi.
Hi.
Hi to everyone around the world.
Hi.
Okay, so the whole point of these sutras is to receive knowledge, power, wisdom, teachings. So we could put our hands in Anjali Mudra. And I'm going to read you one more quote from Mukunda Stiles. Patanjali makes it clear that yoga's goal is a continually unfolding process of self-knowledge through fulfillment of life's 4 arenas of activity. Dharma, which is righteous duty. Artha, which is prosperity. Kama, which is sensual pleasure. And moksha, which is spiritual liberation. The goal of this process is no less than freedom from all limitations and attachments through completely integrating yourself as a spiritual and physical being. So beautiful, Mukunda Stiles. I encourage you all to read that. I find it's the one that I pull off of my bookshelf most often. Any comments, any questions, share what translations you love, share how you're hydrating and nourishing yourself today. It was so awesome to spend 30 minutes with you all, touching on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and diving into the philosophy that's been shared with us through his writings. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe and happy. And Royal, what's the number 1 rule?
Have fun.